It's often said that we know more about the surface of other planets than we do about our own oceans. This principle rings true even in the 41st millennium, where we seem to know more about the cosmos and even the warp than we do about some of the things on Terra itself. Kangbamaru Prison, the vaults of technology underneath the Emperor's throne room, and more than anything, the dark cells of Terra. For those who don't know, at the lowest depths of the Imperial Palace, there exist cells guarded by not just any custodes, the Shadowkeeper custodes, who are some of the actual best of the best of the best of the best. Shadowkeepers are what are known as a shield host, meaning it comprises of about 100 custodes, and they're the strongest, meaning it's the top 100 of the top 10,000 out of the million Space Marines that are usually active in the galaxy on record. The reason I preface that is because I want to make it clear these guys are tough as hell. So, when the Great Rift opened, and some of the Shadowkeepers had to leave to help fight off a demonic invasion of Terra, and came back to find the Shadowkeepers who had been patrolling the cells all dead, that's really concerning. These guys don't die easily. During this event, a lot of the cells were found missing, which threw the Shadowkeepers into a sort of code red panic, and yeah, I get it. Because what's kept in those dark cells are objects and entities which are kept under such tight lock and key because if they were to be allowed to run amok, it could spell the end of humanity, or at least cause havoc beyond reckoning. It's these objects and entities that are the subject of today's video because they're actually really interesting despite there being next to no information on them. And you guys know me, I love to take a little throwaway line of dialogue or text and just run wild with it. So let's get right into it. Now, one thing that should be clarified before getting into this, it is stated that while not everything held in the dark cells is alive, everything does have anima. And anima, in a philosophical context, is the irrational part of the soul that acts in opposition to the more rational animus. What this screams to me in a fictional context is those sort of cursed objects that whisper for you to put the ring on, or wield the sword, or that sort of thing. Now, when talking about the Dark Cells, the first thing you should touch on is the 4 demons the Custodes keep down there in order to test new Shadowkeepers. The first of these is called the Granter of All 6 Wishes, which is a Slaaneshi demon who a prospective Shadowkeeper must sit and listen to speak for a day and a night, and then get up without any hesitation or trepidation. The next is the Sevenfold Triasma, which is a Nurgle demon who a custodian applicant must sit and breathe in the fumes of for 3 hours without requesting aid. Next is Eight of the Skull, which is a Khorne demon, duh, and a custodian must defeat it in combat, both unarmed and unarmored. And I love how fighting the Khornate demon is considered on the same caliber as just breathing in a Nurgle demon for like 3 hours. Like, it's just that bad. And lastly is the Soul Delver, which is a 9-eyed demon of Tzeentch, and a prospective Shadowkeeper must sit and look into its eyes for a full 24 hours and not blink. Now, while this is all really cool, it's not particularly interesting, but what is everything else, because a lot of these things are, quote, relics from old night, or alien-related. Allow me to read an excerpt. The most learned of Imperial historiators cannot even imagine what treasures and horrors are kept within the Imperial Palace's vaults, archives, and jails. There are more chambers and cells than anyone can name, and much of what lies therein is so dreadful that they could bring about the fall of humanity, or shatter the sanity of any augmented human that learned of them. Relics of the Dark Age of technology, such as the Lament of Unreason, the Black Parapat of Rydeniel, and the hideous Tri-Blight Amulet, are kept under psychically charged lock and key, behind meters-thick slabs of gene-sealed adamantine that are covered in runic wards. There are also Xenos artifacts, some all that remain of civilizations that became extinct millions of years ago. The vaults not only hold artifacts and relics, however, they also hold beings. It That Craves, Subject 11, and One of the Fell are but a handful of thousands. At times, the Custodes have even had to hold back the horrifying denizens of the Runelock vaults from breaking free of their imprisonment. Now, right away, that's a lot of fancy names and titles just dropped on us, so let's go through those. Those ones, specifically It That Craves and One of the Fell, sound to me like, I don't know, maybe they could be Catan shards, especially It That Craves, but they really could be anything. especially considering some of the stuff that existed in the galaxy back during the War of Heaven and during Old Night. This also applies to other things such as the Lament of Unreason or the Triblight Amulet, which clearly is something Nurgle related, but there are other ones that do spark more interest than even these. For example, the Black Periopt of Raidenil. Raidenil is spelled R-A-I-T-H-E-N-Y-L. That smacks of the Eldari language, and one thing we know about humanity before Old Night was that they fraternized a lot and even traded with openly the Eldari. So this seems like some sort of Eldari technology that was either co-opted or freely given. Another being of note is the Sorrow of Caracalla, which the Shadowkeepers vowed would, quote, never stalk the stars again. And the thing is, Caracalla is a Roman emperor, and he was known for being a really bloodthirsty tyrant, so I'm not really sure if there's a connection there, but I don't know. There's also the Chalice of Dark Alabaster, and alabaster, for those who don't know, is a white sort of plaster that is made by grinding up a certain stone. So this being the opposite of that, just really dark, as opposed to alabaster white, which is known as being very bright. And this chalice was stolen by the Astral Claws, later named Red Corsairs, under the command of Lufthiron. Now, the loss of this one was actually quite a big deal, because a custodian by the name of Arian Porphyrius took it upon himself to hunt down the Astral Claws, all the way to their base, and then into the Great Rift itself, just to get this thing back. The other Shadowkeepers have written him off and believe he's dead because they haven't heard back from him, but I don't think so. I think he's still gunning for them. Though, knowing GW, we're never going to hear about it again. This was just like a throwaway line in the 9th edition codex. Now, I get all of this stuff has been pretty GW mundane with, ooh, there's this mysterious thing that we're not going to tell you about at all, but there are two more things that I want to talk about, which I do find to be genuinely a lot more interesting. The first one being something called the Slithering Dreamer. The reason this one is interesting is because a named custodian is one who went to kill it, namely Jaharl Feldoris Gao, and he's what's known as a custodian warden, meaning someone with a minimum of 500 years of service. Moreover, he had been a Shadowkeeper for around 1,700 years. What's really interesting is the word slithering in the name, because that implies a sort of serpentine connection. In Eldari culture, the word snake, or Saim as it is in their language, is a creature that knows the secrets of the universe, or generally has secret knowledge. And this idea of something that has that serpentine infinite knowledge, as well as dreaming, for some reason it kind of reminds me of the Elder Scrolls, specifically Morrowind, like Dagoth-Ur and mainly the Godhead theory, for those of you that know of it, which states that in the Elder Scrolls, the entirety of reality is the dream of an unfathomable, all-knowing being called the Godhead, and being able to affect that dream grants you an almost infinite source of power called Chim. For some reason, it just reminds me of that. The last of these entities I want to talk about is a being. This one is called Subject 11. Now, for those of you more versed in 40k lore, that should immediately start raising some hairs on the backs of some necks, because 11 is a very specific number. Namely, the two Primarchs and their subsequent legions that are never revealed are Legion and Primarch 2 and Legion and Primarch 11. The reason given for this is never stated in canon, but we know for a fact they were wiped away, because in a short story, which I believe it's called The Last Council, Malcador the Sigillite recalls the time Horus, Jagatai Khan, and Alfarius confronted him while he was removing statues of the 2nd and 11th Primarchs, confronting him on as to why he was destroying these icons of their beloved brothers, and Malcador was so enraged, he nearly killed Horus. This should make clear how much of a big deal this was, but I for one don't believe the Emperor would be the kind of person to just completely eliminate these two Primarchs without trying something first. And this is what I and many other people believe Subject 11 actually is. Some kind of attempt to recreate the 11th Primarch, which more than likely went very, very wrong, and the results of which are being kept deep in the cells where no one could find it. Now, you're probably reasonably asking yourself, hey, if these things are so dangerous and existentially threatening to the entire species, why even keep them around? Why not just destroy them to begin with? Now, the reasoning for that, to my mind, probably comes from the Emperor himself, because he was always a Plan Z kind of guy. He was never above keeping dangerous and destructive things in his back pocket to use if things really got bad, hence why he actually gave the remains of some men of iron to Lionel Johnson to use as a weapon of absolute last resort, and gave Lionel Johnson the Terminus Decree to wipe out humanity if it looked like chaos was going to take over the species. And there are other instances, like how he had Vulcan craft several devices that could destroy Terra itself if it looked like demons were going to overrun by the end of the Horus Heresy. Unfortunately, despite this being all really interesting, there's very little information to go on because basically everything I've talked about comes from the 8th edition and 9th edition Custodes Codexes, as well as a novella called Auric Gods. But what do you guys think? Do you think we're going to hear more about the Dark Cells and their contents in a future update or in a future novel? Or do you have any theories about what Subject 11 or the Slithering Dreamer or anything else I've mentioned could be? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video.